Blind Nil Audio.
Have you ever caught yourself making a decision about money, big or small, and realizing, wait, whose voice is that in my head? Is this really me? Or is that voice the voice of my parents? Maybe a professor, the culture, or even fear? Gena Gorlin gets this, and she has spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to unwind it. She's a clinical psychologist who helps people, entrepreneurs, builders, deep thinkers, break free from these stories, these voices, these mental scripts that keep them stuck. And she's got a zinger that really hit me hard in this conversation. She said, at some point, you have to decide, do you want to be free or do you want to be safe? That's the kind of question that sticks with you. And it's at the core of how Gena thinks about work and money and life. In this episode, we talk about her immigrant roots, scarcity mindset, opportunity cost, and how she's made the shift from saving out of fear to building out of purpose. This one really made me think, and I think it'll do the same for you. I'm so excited to have this conversation. I have been digging into your work from the Every stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm really curious about, Gena, is your first memory of money. What comes up when you think about your first memory of money?
So I suppose my first memories are of not having much and of being starkly aware at the same time of the differences in baseline abundance. So I immigrated at age 7 with my parents from Odessa, Ukraine, which is where I was born. And we moved to Indiana because that was where the Jewish Federation placed us at the time.
Right,
And we went where we were sent. And there are so much I could say about the memories of that transformation in my life.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to double click on anything. But just as a gestalt experience, I both remember entering a new world, like where it was literally as well as figuratively brighter everywhere. Literally because there's actually just more light and electricity is less scarce, and figuratively in that people smiled more and were nicer to me, and there were more colors everywhere. And I remember the first time I walked into a grocery store, like a supermarket, and I nearly fell down. Like I remember I needed to grab my mom's hand on one side, whatever rail on the other, because I'd never seen anything so large and so densely packed with things. And then when we entered an aisle and I saw, wait, it's not just that they have milk in stock after 6 a.m. It's that they have chocolate milk and strawberry milk, and they've got different brands of milk and different flavors. And then they've got all these yogurts, and then they've got, and when we first arrived at our first apartment, our fridge, whoever had stocked it for us had put some bananas and some Snicker bars in the fridge. And my only encounter with a banana prior to that point had been in kindergarten when a mom had gone overseas, had gone abroad to the West, and then had brought back a banana for the class and cut it into pieces for us. And it was one of these exotic moments where I got to taste the West in the form of this little slice of banana. And now there was just a whole bunch of bananas just sitting in our fridge, and some Snicker bars, which I'd also not eaten. And I remember the swirly rainbow colored lollipop that I insisted my parents buy for me when we first deplaned in JFK. And so just a long series of memories like that, combined with being the weird immigrant kid who bought her clothes at garage sales and needing to sort of assuming scarcity by default, even here, but relative to what I saw American kids being able to afford, but really having that in context.
That's amazing. I'm curious about the strange kid that got their clothes at garage sales. How did you know that was strange?
I was told in no uncertain terms by all the other kids in my class. I mean, I was mercilessly bullied and mocked and made fun of. I mean, there was this honeymoon period where I'd first arrived in America and mostly I didn't know any English yet. I was dealing mostly with like the ESL teacher who was really sweet and patient with me. And the kids didn't quite know what to make of me yet. That was first grade, halfway through first grade. And then as I started to assimilate a little bit more and understand a little bit more English and sort of made my first attempts at being one of the kids and playing games with them or making overtures at friendship, that's when the mockery started. I
Wow.
mean, mainly I knew that I didn't know how to dress or how to do my hair because
And
I,
you knew that just
you
by
know,
looking around,
well, and again, by being told
told.
in all kinds of colorful, imaginative ways,
Yeah.
that kids would call me. Just when I read back through my diaries, I started keeping a diary around at age 10, and I would document the insults that I was receiving, and
Wow.
they were really mean. Just
Yeah.
being totally honest with you. So yeah, so I knew there
Yeah.
was something that there were norms that I didn't understand and was missing out on. And how much of that had to do with just the pure lack of money and how much of it had to do with ignorance. Like I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And my parents certainly had no clue how a kid is quote supposed to dress, in first,
Yeah.
second, third grade and how to do my hair and this kind of thing.
What what do you remember your parents teaching you about class or money back then? Like not even necessarily back then, but just as you
Easy.
progress through
Yeah, that's
junior high,
easy.
what did your parents teach you
Yeah.
about money?
That you never have enough of it and you need to be really frugal and that you should always be worried about running out and that you should
Wow.
always feel bad about spending a penny. Just
Wow.
straightforwardly, that was the ethos. And I get it because
Sure.
that
Because
was
that their lived
the
experience.
literal state of affairs for them. Yeah, for most of
Yeah.
their lives. So
Yeah.
that definitely, I still to this day, I fight that internalized scarcity mindset daily and joke about it
what do
with my
you
husband.
yeah, what do you do when it comes up? Because it's so interesting to me because that was a very adaptive behavior for your parents. Like it was important, it was survival, like it meant something. And now I'm assuming it's relatively maladaptive for you,
Yes,
but the
correct.
wiring is still there. So, like, what do
Yep.
you do when that scarcity monster shows back up?
Great question. So, one recent innovation that I have to credit my husband for was that, and he has a very different history and personal kind of story with money that complements mine very nicely. He just approaches it very differently. He at one point started to ask me, so, how many units of therapy hours is this like price comparison costing you? If it takes you an
Wow.
hour, that's $600 because that's how much I charge for therapy sessions now. So like
Yeah.
he really concretized for me, like if you're spending more than an hour trying to keep the costs down or if the like
Interesting.
relative if saving this old broken coffee cup or backpack or whatever is going to actually eat more into your quality of life than what that hour of therapy is worth to you, like then the cost benefit analysis clearly stacks up against this quote unquote savings. So he's really helped me kind of
Mm.
concretize that because it's
Yeah.
really hard in the abstract. It's like, well, I don't know, how much is this worth to me in the long run, given that, sure, we have all these savings, but you never know. There
Yeah.
could be an apocalypse. We could run out. And
Yeah.
it's so ingrained in me.
I mean, I'm curious actually. There's a bunch of threads I want to pull on there, but you just did this to your chest. Where do you feel it when
What
the
a great
scarcity
question.
thing shows up? Like where do you
Yeah.
feel it in your body?
That's you're pulling a me on me. This is really interesting. That's a
Sorry.
really good therapist move. No, I appreciate it. In my chest, definitely there's a kind of tightness, a constriction that happens. I
Yeah.
imagine, or I can kind of feel when I check in with that part of myself, I can almost feel my
Yeah.
breathing getting shallower. Like I can't afford to let out a full breath.
Can't afford. Yeah, I'm so back to this. It's interesting to me how often we feel those feelings that are maybe even deeply genetic and were hardwired at one point to keep us alive. Like there is a lion actually in the bush. you need to run. And now there's no lion for me. I'm like, I'm just writing an email. Like it's going to be okay.
Yep.
But it's interesting how often I let that feeling still drive
Yeah.
unconsciously.
It's
Like,
the
because
default.
it's saying
Yeah.
stop, right?
Yeah.
Like you're
It's
going to die.
absolutely a
Stop.
default. That's right. Yeah, what's hardwired is the alarm system, right? We have a
Right.
fight or flight system. And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right that has served us very well when there was a lion and we needed to run away, when there was, immediate acute threat
Yeah.
around every corner. And to the extent that we just need to fend off those immediate threats just to not die, our alarm
Yeah.
system is really useful for having us not die in the moment. What it's much less useful for, and where we have this whole set of higher order cognitive and emotional faculties that we entrain and that don't kick in by default, that we sort of need to learn and kind of fill with content and substance and values that we have internalized and that are much more tonic rather than phasic in how they function. They're accessible if we tune into them, if we talk to them, if we dialogue with that part of ourselves, but they don't blare at us, right? Like they don't have that kind of alarm quality. And so it's much more of a cultivated motivation. Wait, actually, I'm after something here. There's an end game that is, a life fully lived, that is a career
Yeah.
that fulfills a bunch of my valued ends and that allows me to thrive and flourish and to provide my children with a very different kind of childhood and a
Yeah.
different experience of the world than I had, right? Like there are all these reasons why I want to spend money. There are all of these ways. The whole point of making money, right, is to then be able to exercise agency over our lives by exercising
Right.
our capital. Right? That's sort of the point. Otherwise, why have it?
Yeah. I want to just sort of wrap up the what do you do when the feelings of scarcity come back. Your first example was relatively practical, and if I understand it correctly, it's almost like an income arbitrage answer, right? Like, I'm going to drive to Costco because it's going to save me an extra 5 cents a gallon on gas, but just the act of driving there is going to cost me, you know,
Right. Yeah,
$100,
exactly.
whatever that. So that's a very practical sort of tactical
Mhm.
tool that we hear a lot of. But I'm curious, like, those tactical answers don't seem to unwind the nervous
Mm-mm.
system response. Like what do
Yeah,
you do when you're like, okay, like what do you do when that scarcity monster shows back up?
that's a great question. I mean, in a way, I've built my whole career around the answer
Exactly.
to that question. What do we
For
do?
other people.
But also, and in some ways, first and foremost for myself,
Sure.
I activate what I've been calling my builder's mindset. That's
Hmm.
sort of like, the
Yeah.
at least current
Yeah.
branding that I've chosen for this perspective on the world that
Yeah.
I think that we can internalize and then act, and call upon as and when we need to regain perspective, and that there are feelings that come with it and behavioral repertoires that come with it. The most relevant feature of that mindset here is the abundance feature, right? That
Mhm.
part of what I have encoded within this terminology of the builder's mindset is a worldview on which we have radical agency and the world is our oyster. And fundamentally, life is a positive sum game. It is not a zero sum game of just trying not to be eaten by lions or trying not to be outdone by our competitors, whatever the case may be, but rather it's a positive sum game of creation, of
Mhm.
building and relishing and integrating all these parts of the life that we've built for ourselves, that we have this incredible span of existence to savor, to milk for all that it's worth. And so we could talk for hours about how I activate that mindset for myself and for others. But that's what's
Mm.
underneath the tactic of like, Gina, how much do you make again in your sessions? Like, what is this really
Right.
about?
Right.
The underlying premise there, you're right, that it's not the cost benefit calculus per se that reorients me, but rather what it means to me, which is like, right, no, there's a certain way that I want to live. This ain't it.
We'll be right back with more from 50 Fires. Welcome back to 50 Fires. Oh, it's so interesting to me. What is that? The Krishnamurti quote of like, it's no sign of health to be well adapted to a sick system or something. You know,
Yes,
it
it's a
feels
great
to
quote.
me like and I've got a whole list of them here of, I'm going to call them controversial, right? But
Hmm.
they're not at all, but they're countercultural a bit in the
Hmm.
sense that the culture we've built around wealth is broken, right?
Yes.
And so you sort of come along with some relatively strong opinions
Yeah. No,
about how
they are
things,
countercultural. Yeah. No,
yeah,
I'm
how things could be
totally with you.
different, and it feels radical, and you're like, I don't
Yep.
understand why this is radical. So let me ask you about a few of these. So, and let's go right into sort of this builder's mindset. You've worked. Let's talk first about this broken relationship with wealth. You, in your professional work, you've worked with founders who feel guilty about wanting to make money, or shame on the flip side, shame if they don't care about making it.
Yeah. Yep. I've seen
Why?
both.
How did we get here? Why is this relationship so
Yeah.
broken?
I mean, we could get into the philosophical, historical roots of this twisted relationship we have with money. And happy to do that. That would be fun. I think it goes way back. Like, I think,
Yeah.
it's correlated non-accidentally with a lot of other broken sort of assumptions and associations we have in our culture with success more generally, with the idea that there are no moral billionaires, the idea that there are no moral builders, right? The idea that it's, again, zero sum, right?
Mm,
That if
mm,
like if for every have there has to be a have not, right? That whole underlying ethos, I think, is a big part of what's to blame.
mm,
And I think that goes way back to, ancient-ish times, whenever we first see the idea that our one ethical mandate is non-harm of other people rather than anything constructive about how to actually live our lives. Like from the
mm,
point where we see that kind of zero sum ethos getting introduced, I think we can trace it back that far. But yeah, as
mm,
it manifests today, I think we see this really broken ethos around what it means to make money, whether you conceive of money as primarily, fundamentally a product of creation effort, a representative, a unit of currency for something real, right? For value created for people, or whether you see it as an empty status signal, which it sometimes can be, right? To be sure.
yeah.
But like what you fundamentally understand it to represent, right? It's like, to the extent that you see it to represent the beating out and pushing down of other people less fortunate than you. And that's your one conception of how someone could come about wealth is, well, they must have trampled over all the little people whom they forced to use their social media platform, or whom they exploited with their cable internet that people just, have to use in order to communicate with other people. And what choice do they have? And so they've been robbed of their precious resources so that this billionaire could thrive. Like, if that's your picture of the world, and by the way, that's a pretty communistic picture of the world,
Yeah.
remembering my origins, like,
Yeah.
oh, wait, I've heard this before. It has a lot of
Yeah.
familiarity, a lot of resonance in my mind. But to the
Yeah.
extent that that's our picture, yeah, we're going to feel bad about ourselves to the extent that we want more wealth. And even when what we want out of that wealth is actually good, even if what we want is greater agency over the kinds of causes we support, the kind of life we design, not just for ourselves, for our children, for our family, for our friends, for our loved ones, right? The scope of our influence over the world. How big is the dent we get to make? Like, that gets what I think should be romanticized, because what higher calling is there than to like live your life to the fullest and make your distinct, authentic mark upon your world? Instead, that gets villainized, I think, because again, people associate it with this zero sum kind of um, exploitation.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you about, we had Kara Swisher on recently, and she
That's
was
awesome.
unapologetic about wanting to make money because, and she used the word, right? Like, which seems like we're not allowed to use, because she wants more power
Hmm.
to make the kind of change she wants to see in the world.
Yeah.
And then she was pointing to other examples of people who were this was around the election time. She's pointing to other examples of people who have lots of money making a
Yes.
particular kind of change. And she tell me your take on that approach. Is wanting wealth for power inherently good or bad?
It's a great question. So crucially, I don't use the term power for this.
No, I thought it was
I,
really interesting for her to use the term. It felt pretty loaded.
I think it is. And I think I see what she's getting at. And the way she's using it, given what I think she's saying, I fully agree with her. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's a really virtuous motivation actually to have, even though, again, it's villainized and looked down upon. But I think part of my diagnosis for why it's villainized and looked down upon is because of the equivocation in the term power
Mhm.
and the way that it packages together two very different things, which I think are just fundamentally different motives and different
Mm.
ways of living life. Where one is the sense of power that focuses on your relation to other people. You want power over people. You want to get to make people do things. You want to pass laws that, or, you want the regulations to work out your way, whatever it is. Like that's in effect what I would call political power.
Mhm.
The other is what I would call agency,
Hmm.
influence, impact, right? Like you
Mm.
want to be able to shape the world in the image of your values. And you don't get to force anyone to do anything on that view. And that's why
Mm.
I don't like using the term power to refer to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And now it's particularly ambiguous in this context where, as you mentioned, around the election, we've got some really wealthy, high status, high agency, high power people sort of wielding their agency in ways that look a lot like the kind of quest for political power, but also there are questions around to what extent they're motivated to just be left alone versus to make people do what they want them to. Like that's where I think it's
Yeah.
actually getting so muddied. But
Yeah.
this is part of the problem. Like I think we need to demuddy these very different terms and the underlying motivations that they represent. One is about building and one is ultimately about like ruling and destroying.
Yeah. Let's building. Do you distinguish? Because I'm sort of curious about creativity and money being dirty, right? I want to
Mm,
talk a bit about that because I have this
yes.
this this idea that I want to run past you. But do you distinguish between builders who are building something? And here's maybe a way to ask it. Like if you've made an insane amount of money off something that is inherently causing lots of damage in the world, or something that is just a widget factory, like it's not causing damage, but it's not something you feel passionate about. It's just like I would argue maybe like a dry cleaning empire, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, I would be willing to bet a lot of money, as it were, that someone somewhere in the world at some point in history has been deeply passionate about building their dry cleaning empire,
okay,
and rightly
okay,
so.
fair,
But that's
fair enough,
relevant. Anyway, go
fair
ahead.
enough. It is, but
And I'm so
let's just
glad, because I
yeah,
love my
likewise.
dry clean. But go on. Sorry. Yes, so they're
Let's just
building something
let's
that's
just take
net bad somehow.
somebody who's doing something that is demonstrably good and making an impact for positive in the world. I'm thinking like, let's say somebody who's really concerned about cybersecurity and protecting people from stealing lots of money from banks.
Sure.
And then
But
somebody
also,
else
like,
who's,
yeah. So go ahead. Yeah,
and then let's
please.
say something, let's just use like a really bad version of social media. We could pick a
Yeah, I mean, this is where
specific
like we could
company.
also debate because I think social media has also been villainized in ways that are at least partly undeserved and unjust. But that's like a
Yeah.
whole separate conversation. But sure,
I
like
guess the question is, let's assume that you could see there's a builder making something that's negative,
okay, so
net negative in the
let's say
world.
Manhattan, like you're helping to build the nuclear bomb, right? Let's like, just use an unambiguous example like that.
Or a pharmaceutical company that sells opioids.
Yeah, which again, okay, but the reason that they can make money off of opioids legally is
It's because it
because
helps in
opioids
some
are,
way.
I wouldn't want to live in a world without that level of pain relief for those who are
Yeah.
recovering
Yeah.
from
Okay.
surgery, et cetera, et
Well,
cetera.
I'm having a
So
hard
it's
time
not that
getting.
unambiguous. Like,
Is
well, can
there
we do the nuclear bomb
is
example?
yeah, sure. I guess what I'm saying, what I'm trying to get at is there any distinguishing factor in your mind between the type of person who is building something because they're so deeply like building is the game. Like they just love building, which I know you've pointed to in a couple of different essays. Like they make money so they can build. They don't
But also
necessarily
vice
build.
versa. But yes,
Yeah.
sure. Sure, sure.
Yeah. Is there any distinguishing variable in your mind between is that even a factor that you think about or even
So
exists?
so let me reflect and
Yeah.
see if I
Yeah.
understand the question. So is the question like, are there people who, on the one hand, is there a distinction between people who want to build for the good of building and for the meaning and joy of building versus people who have dirty, bad motivations for whatever they're building?
Are there
Is that the
are
question?
there some
Is there
evil,
such a thing as an
tricky
evil capitalist?
capitalists?
I mean, sure,
Yeah.
there's Madoff. There's Elizabeth, what's her name? Holmes,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
terrible with names, right? I mean, there are plenty of dirty capitalists, but what I think that means in part is that they're
Interesting.
engaging in activity that either defrauds their
Yeah.
customers or whatever stakeholders of the public, or they're trying to get away with something. Absolutely, I think there are plenty of
Yeah.
really crappy, unethical business people who have tried to get away with things. And sometimes they get away with those things for a long time before they're caught or
Yeah.
before the consequences catch up to them. But I do think
Mm.
that you've got to actually, to the extent that you're trying, to the extent that you're transparently offering some product or service in exchange for people's voluntary payment, in exchange for
Mm.
people's desired behavior, and that you can't force them. I mean, no, the moment we enter into, again, the realm of like, well, you can lobby for regulations that favor you with artificial restrictions, monopolies, so that no one else can come in and compete with you, even if you suck or even if you overcharge. Yeah, like that invites all manner of corruption and
Mm.
and bad faith, in my view. But to the extent that you're operating in a context where you've got to convince people to buy your product, because it's good or because they want it, and you're not defrauding anybody, which I think is and probably should be illegal to do,
Mm.
right? Like I think you've
Mm.
got to trade in good faith. To
Mhm.
that extent, I think to the extent that you're quote evil or bad, it's if you're making short-sighted or like
Hmm.
myopic decisions, or you're
Mhm.
kind of lying to yourself about the motivation, where let's say, and I've seen plenty of instances of this, small scale and large scale, where you're telling yourself your motivation is to have this or that kind of impact, or to build a company that will attract great talent or whatever, but really it's to impress the highest status VCs, venture capitalists, right,
Mm.
investors of some
Mhm.
value. Really it's to punish someone that you've got a grudge against who didn't hire you once, and so you're wanting to crush
Mm.
them, whatever the case may be. Like you actually have this kind of pettier motivation,
Mm.
and or you're forgetting to think about the longer term and over indexing on like no, like it's basically a scarcity mindset often that's operative
Mm.
for founders, for entrepreneurs as well, who are just trying to rack up as much cash as possible without thinking about longer term. Wait, are we actually building a sustainable business model? Like is this
Mm.
actually, if
Mm.
we're a pharmaceutical company and we're selling opioids, like are we thinking about how
Mhm.
our reputation is going to fare over a span of years to decades? So if we're really
Mm.
trying to build a great and sustainable business, are we thinking about the kind of
Hmm.
what this will cost us down the line longer term,
Mm.
given the potentially unforeseen dangers,
Yeah.
consequences?
Yeah, there's so much to talk about there, right?
I
Like
know.
I was
Sorry,
just
that was a
thinking
big
of like,
ramble.
are you an agricultural company that is selling cigarettes? Have you thought about that? And then at what point did you start engaging in stuff that was, quote unquote evil, right? Suppressing information around addiction so that you could continue to make money off of something that was having a negative impact on the world.
I mean, I do think that there are ways to be evil in all
Yeah.
contexts, including those kinds of contexts. And I'm always sort of consciously pushing back on what I see as these entrenched biases within the culture that will tend
Hmm.
to assume the entrepreneur guilty until proven innocent, and will tend to
Right.
assume the humanitarian innocent until proven
Right.
guilty. Right. And I think
Right.
we need to exercise scrutiny on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Something changed for me a couple of years ago because I've always seen myself as a creative, and businesses are a canvas for me. And
Hmm.
something changed
I
when I
love that.
started to see profit equals permission.
Hmm.
I started to see like, because I started to realize that my only goal with the current project was to earn permission to do the next one, because there's always going to be a next one.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that I just want to secure permission to do projects forever, because it's
Mhm.
love doing them. And so when I started to see profit equals permission, and I didn't mean permission from the world necessarily, like profit equals permission to do a bad thing. Like if you make profit doing something bad, I meant, I started to realize that without profit, there was no next project, right?
Interesting. Yeah. And can I ask, I mean, did you
Yeah.
think of it like at a symbolic level? Like it would be permission I grant myself because now I've shown myself that I can make this much or that I can produce this amount of value? Or was it more practical? Like, well, I'm going to need capital for my next project and I don't want to make myself dependent on, XYZ purse holders. And so if I want permission, I need to literally earn it.
Both.
Or was it some mix? Okay.
Yeah, both. I mean,
Interesting.
early when I was thinking about the goal of the current project is to earn permission to do the next one, before profit got in there, I was like, in what form does permission come? Well, it comes from readers, the public. I need to never violate that trust, right? And then I was like, oh, and it also comes in the form of money, like giving myself the permission to continue to operate, versus putting on the khaki pants and sitting under the fluorescent light at the cubicle, right? Like taking the job.
Yeah.
So that's when I was like,
Interesting.
so when I did that, suddenly like my monthly meeting with my CFO was like my favorite meeting.
Mhm.
And the cash flow statement I enjoyed, because I was like, wait, this is
Interesting.
part of this is the fuel for the artistic endeavor.
Absolutely.
How,
Yeah, I love that.
yeah, well, tell me, why do you love it?
Because I think it's a really nice illustration of the way that I think a healthy approach to money tightly integrates what it means to you practically and what it means to you spiritually. Like the two are not just accidentally correlated. The two are tightly interconnected because of the kind of causal relationship between what kind of respect and trust you're building with your readership based on the body of work that you're producing and how you're being recompensed for it, right? Like the two are both representative of each other and enabling of each other, because the resources that you're accumulating, right, the remuneration you're receiving for your work also then serves as capital, serves as an enabler of further and larger scale work, where money is a representation, right? It's like it's an abstracted measure of value. That's what it is, right? We invented money so that we could have a division of labor society where we trade value for value, despite the fact that people value different things. And so what it represents in a healthy psychology and in a healthy society is a unit of value that you've earned and that now you can both be proud of, right? And that you can also put toward further endeavors that will create further value for you and for those you're trading with. Like to me, there's just
Yeah.
something really healthy about that.
You used a word there I'm curious about: spiritual. Tell
Yeah,
me
I do
more
use that
about
word in a funny way. Yeah.
spiritual in relationship to building and money.
Yeah. So, first, just to be really transparent, I don't mean any religious connotation by
Sure.
spiritual. I'm
Sure.
not myself religious, and I don't think that you need the one for the other. But what I mean is emotional, psychological, mental. And I think the word spiritual does work for me that those terms alone wouldn't do, because it
Mm.
conveys the importance and the sanctity, if you will, right? Like just the prime, fundamental, like irreducible importance of what things mean to us, of our
Mm.
internal experience of
Mm.
the life we're living and the value we're creating and the people we're connecting with and so on. It's the mind part of that mind body unity that I think we don't appreciate enough.
Yeah, it's just interesting because I've used both two phrases: entrepreneurship as a spiritual practice,
Mm.
for a long time, just because I kept finding myself bumping up against things about my behavior that were complicit in producing suboptimal results either in the
Mhm.
team or investors or whoever. And I was like, oh, and I was like, no, again, it was like,
Yeah.
it started to replace a really beautiful sort of metaphor for a Zen teacher. Like, oh, boom, like get whacked upside the head again. And you either get to ignore it and pretend like it's everybody else's fault, or you get to say what Jerry Colonna likes to say, like, in what way was I complicit in that result? Was my behavior complicit? And then I also
Beautiful.
love like budgeting as a spiritual practice,
Mhm.
because it really forces you, right? Like the calendar and the checkbook never lie. Like if I want to tell you what's important to you, it's pretty easy. Just show me how you spend your money
Yeah,
and I'll tell you. So
exactly.
let me ask you a question. If I'm curious about this, if 100 years from now we found some super intelligence found your spending, your checkbook register, but we don't use those anymore. Just so your
My
credit card
Bank of
statement,
America account, whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, and
What
Robinhood
and that's all they knew
holdings.
about you.
Yeah. Ooh,
What would
interesting.
they know?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. I'm deciding whether, I mean, I'm sure that the scarcity mindset would at least present itself as a hypothesis, because they would
Hmm.
see that I've got income streams that are disproportionate to some of the pettiness of my
Spending choices you're making.
spending. Yeah. But also, let's see. I mean, what a great one. I think they would see how much I value my kids and their
Hmm.
education and their experience of growing up. Because that would be, where they see some of my biggest expenditures and investments. They would see how idiosyncratically and scrappily I've cobbled together my career, because they'd
Hmm.
see that, wow, okay, she's got money coming in from a bunch of different places. She's got this university paying her every month, but then she's also got all these coaching clients, and she's got,
Hmm.
this book she's writing, and she's just doing, she's got this portfolio of interrelated activities that somehow add up to making a good sum of money. And they would, that's so interesting. Yeah, they would probably, I mean, now I kind of want to go and actually like do the exercise, the Rorschach analysis of,
Give it all to Chat GPT and
ChatGPT
have it
can
tell
do
you.
it. What? Ooh, have you
I
tried
know.
this? That'd be such an interesting
Well, I
experiment.
actually wanted to talk to you and Dan about this idea, but no, I have not
Huh.
tried it. What an interesting idea, right?
Yeah, that could be so psychologically revealing and
Yeah.
personally, a form of self-assessment that could
Yeah.
yield
Just
potentially
feed
unintuitive insight,
your last 5 years worth of bank statements and credit card
Wow.
statements. We'll scrub them, make them anonymous, and we will tell you what's important to you.
So yeah, I mean, they would see that I value art and music, and that I am willing to spend disproportionate amounts of money on like certain kinds of relational experiences, like a one-time, conference or gathering of smart, ambitious people
Mm.
across disciplines, or, that I'm
Mm.
willing to travel for things that will put me in contact with really cool people,
Mm.
but much stingier when it comes to the hotel purchase, which I know is
Right,
the
right.
flip side of what is. I listened to a little bit of that episode with Ms. Swisher,
Yeah,
and I know
yeah.
she'll splurge on the hotel,
Right, right,
so
right.
complementary
Let me
values.
let me ask you before we move on, what would you be embarrassed about?
Mm,
What would you hope they wouldn't find?
that's what I'm sort of plowing my subconscious for, because I would probably also be less likely to come up with it on the
Right,
fly
right.
in this podcast episode. But I want to give you an honest answer, because I'm sure there'd be things I'd be embarrassed about. I think, I mean, one thing, I don't know if this counts, like if this would get revealed within this thought experiment, but just how disorganized and cobbled together my whole budgeting system is. And
Hmm.
also, so for example, they would see that I'm stingy when it comes to certain like ops, at like organizational level
Hmm.
systems that would make my life a lot easier. Like
Hmm.
I still don't use QuickBooks. I
Hmm.
refuse. And so I've got Excel spreadsheets, and I've got
Hmm.
my several bank, like it's a mess. Like that, yeah, I think they would see my ADHD tendencies revealed.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of illogic of some of those under investments in certain tools that would make my life easier, and sort of like relative over investments in other things that I couldn't necessarily make a strong case for if I had a CFO.
Yeah.
Trying to
Yeah.
justify things too. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm trying
No,
to
that's a good answer.
I think those would be some of them. I'm sure there are others.
You mentioned going to places where you would meet cool people. I'm curious about this sort of decoupling that we talked about earlier, like building and money, and how you're saying, look, they're a little more tightly correlated. Let's pretend like we were in the room with 20 of the most important venture capitalists in the world, and you were telling them one or two or three things about founders' relationship with money,
Mm.
right? Like that would be like the most helpful. You're like, this is the biggest blind spot. I don't understand why you people don't get this. Like
Ooh,
what
good
would come
question.
out of your mouth when you're like, this is the thing that
That's a
drives me the
really good question.
craziest. Yeah.
Yeah. So number one would be your portfolio founders feel beholden to your money in ways that are actually making them worse at executing on their mission and maximizing the chances of a big return, because they're so worried about like if we go to zero and we don't be like they're expecting us to be fund returners. Like they've over-indexed on, okay, like our VCs, we are committed to them to be this type of company, and so we need to take these kinds of big swings, and we need to show them that we're growing really fast, and god forbid that we disappoint them by becoming a like quote unquote lifestyle business, where actually like that quote slower path might be the one that positions them to develop a stickier product that over time will actually have a bigger return, and just will reputationally be be higher profile and more kind of distinct and enduring. See, whenever I speak to VCs, they're sort of like, well, no, I mean, obviously, we're giving each of these companies, whatever it is, 1 in 100 odds of actually being the fund returner, right? And we know
Yeah.
most of them won't be returning that. So when we talk to them, like, we're mostly kind of just wanting to support them and give them decent advice, and we're hoping that they do a good job. Ultimately, we want a good relationship with this founder, and if they go on to found something else, we'd like them to reach out to us, because it's really them we invested, especially when they invested early stage, where they're really investing in the founder. Whereas the discrepancy is for the founder, it's like, well, now I owe them a unicorn. And then founders thinking about what does it look like to build a unicorn gets all warped, because it's like this kind of separate introjected like prototype template in their heads that's disconnected from their day-to-day data gathering and kind of growing intuitions about the product and the customer, and what's actually important, which features actually matter. And that rate of growth becomes this out of context kind of mandate, rather than being part of a larger picture of what kind of business do you want to build.
So what would you tell the venture capitalists to do differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think Patrick McKenzie, I think he's the one he had this incredible Twitter thread about how he approaches talking to founders who he thinks might be burnt out or might be on the fence, about running their company, where he basically will free them of their fiscal responsibility. He'll say, I'll sell you my shares at $1, per share, whatever it is, so that you don't feel any obligation to me anymore, because this obligation is illusory. Like, I invested in you. Like, my life will change very little if you decide to give back the money or to, do something else. But like, you're my one truly non-fungible resource. Like, as a VC, you're the one who is the hardest for me to find and to replace it. And so whatever will keep you happy and productive and inspired, that's what I want to align my incentives with. And to be so explicit about that with founders. You're like, if I'm not serving your interest, then I'm not serving mine. So you tell me what you need. And if what you need, obviously within reason, right? Like, if the founder is being irrational about this, they're like, well, I just want to scrap, fire everybody and become a restaurant business, whatever it is. But like, if the founder is thinking honestly, rationally about what is best for them and their business. And if they've burnt out or they've realized that, you know what, this is not what I conceived it to, like, this is too different from the business vision I started with, be very explicit with the founder from day one. Like,
Mm.
you're my non-fungible resource
Hmm.
and you don't owe me anything.
That's amazing, actually, to hear, Patrick. Like, because that is not what you normally hear.
Yeah, I know. It's it's radical. I know, but
yeah, it's
you know,
crazy,
think
but
it
it
works
is
very, very
super
well.
smart. The idea that you're the one non-fungible resource, super smart. Let's flip it just real quickly. Let's pretend like you've got 100 of the best, most interesting, most creative founders in the world in a room. And you're just trying to say, like, universally, here's the biggest blind spot around money. Like, you've literally got broccoli between your two front teeth, and I'm going to tell you right now.
Yeah, this is a good challenge for me because, you know, one of my weak spots is like boiling things down to one sentence, which, yeah, it would be a very valuable thing to have for when
Right.
I'm in that exact situation.
Yeah.
Can I do two?
You can.
I'm such a
Yes, you
cheater.
can.
Because there are two failure modes, and
Yeah.
you know, I see them kind of falling on both
Yeah.
sides of this dichotomy. So the
Yeah.
one failure mode that I would, you know, point them to would be the money is not the end. It's the means. It's a pretty good signal for the end, but it is not the end.
Mm.
Money in itself is meaningless. So stay anchored to what it is the money represents for you. Like, don't just think money, think value. Maybe that, okay. Maybe that's the one-liners. Like, I suggest to you, whenever you find yourself like kind of obsessing over cash amounts, like, insert the word value and then see if that changes anything about your decision making. Like, we've created our ARR is like the amount of value that we've captured from our customers. Like, does it feel weird to say that? If so, rethink what are you charging for, and what is what's the mode of exchange here, such that you feel like you're just cheating, you know. Like, really keep money anchored to what it represents and don't lose sight of that. Like, it's the value, it's the mission, it's the dent you're making in the universe. That would be on the one side, and on the other side it would be money is good, actually. Because again, for all those founders who are like scared and ashamed and, you know, like downplay the fact that they want to make millions off of their startup, you know, like they really act like that. Because I actually think it would be weird to choose that route, to choose building a VC-backed startup, especially with all the pain and struggle and like total ownership, right? And kind of default failure that you're up against. Like, it would be weird and usually stupid to do that to yourself unless you really want to get rich, because that's what it's sort of uniquely suited to do for you, right? Like, this is how to capture a lot of commercial value very quickly. So if that doesn't interest you, if you don't want that, if that's not a type of value that excites you, that you want to be able to leverage, probably don't start a startup. Do you know what I'm like? Then why? Like, just be a researcher, go work for someone else's startup, and who cares how much equity you have? You get to have total autonomy and actually like do the science you want to do. So that would be a big one.
Yeah, that's really a good one. Just getting clear about why. I love thinking in terms of like value creation and value extraction. And getting clear about what's the value you're extracting from this experience. Like, because it's a different model to think the value I'm extracting is freedom, or the value I'm extracting is knowledge, or the value I'm like, those would lead you down different paths. And it's sometimes you do something because there's no economic value to be extracted, but because you're going to learn a ton. Like,
Exactly.
that's totally okay.
Completely.
Right? Just being clear about that.
Yeah, I did a PhD which for sure is not optimized for making a lot of money. But
yeah, that's really interesting, actually. Let me ask you a problem I keep running into, because I'm curious about this, and I know I haven't been able to name it really. The closest I get is success porn, right? People running around waving their hands about the success. And we know that in a complex adaptive environment, right? It's really cute to look back on the last 10 years and make up some cute little story about how you pulled it all off.
Yeah. Ugh, this is
when
such a
largely there was
thorn
a
in my
bunch
side.
of variables. Yeah, like
Yeah.
I don't, because here's
Yep.
what happens to me, and this happens a couple times a year. Somebody will show up and say something like, these are direct quotes. You could build a $20 million business in your sleep. Like that's a direct quote. I can remember where I was on the porch just up there when somebody really smart, very, very successful said that to me. And I probably have 20 examples of that. And I used to go away feeling really like I've done something wrong, like because I'm
Mm.
not running a
Making
$20 million business,
yeah, 20
right?
minutes in your sleep.
And somebody
Wow.
else was like, I could build a business, I could build a $50 million business with you as the kind of like your content at the middle of it. Every time I dive into that, I mean, I could give you another example.
Yeah,
I
I'd be
was
so
getting
curious.
ready to
Yeah.
sell. I was getting ready to sell. I had somebody come to me and say, "Do you own all the rights to all your work?" And I was like, "Yeah." Do you own the IP and do you own the brand? I was like, "Yeah." And they suggested that there was a private equity firm that wanted to buy it for a ridiculous number, and I was like tomorrow. But my question is, because I see this causing so many problems. There's other versions of this. Like you could
But
write
yeah.
a book, you could be a best-selling author. Here's 7 steps to replicating James Clear's success.
Yeah. I've seen it too. I
Right?
mean, the tweets, yeah,
What do we
just
do
are
with
daily.
that? Because the reason I care is it's
Yeah.
causing real harm. Because what
Yeah.
the harm is, the creative who's just doing their work that they care
Yeah.
deeply about and is not seeing that level of success feels like a failure.
I know this very personally because I
Okay,
mean,
tell me about
I
it.
relate so hard to the examples you're giving because I get this all the time. Why
Yeah.
don't you monetize? Why don't you productize your
Monetize.
coaching approach? Why don't, like endlessly. And I've definitely gone a little ways down those rabbit holes and started trying,
Yeah.
like I've done things that actually just were boring for me, were never gonna pay off because I didn't know how to do them and wasn't actually that interested in learning. Slack communities, and with apologies to anybody who participated in some of these brief offerings, like it's nobody's fault but mine that I got sort of wooed by some of these notions of like you could be making so much more if you just X, Y, and this is why I really anchor to like your life, your fully lived life as the measure of all things. And I have a
Mm,
Substack piece that's just called that. It's like the builder's yardstick, your life as the measure
mm,
of all things or of everything or
mm,
whatever it is.
mm,
That it's so easy to get lured by default templates that
hmm,
are like come to us ready made. It's like as if we don't need to do the work of really like thinking through the holistic picture of what would my next 5 years look like and what's important to me
mm,
over this
mm,
time span where like at some point if I don't have kids in this interval then I'm not going to have them, or what will I
mm,
need in order to, if I want to someday be able to travel more, right? Like instead of all the hard work and hard thinking of like what life do I want to build, there's this default 5-step template that you can follow for quote unquote success minus all the substance that goes into defining that for you.
mm,
Right? Like,
mhm.
don't worry about success for you. This is just success for everybody. So just do that, and you'll be fine. Like that's who says that that's success for me, right? Nobody, these people don't know me. Like, it's my
Mhm,
life.
mhm.
That's how I try to, you know, get
What do
some
you
clarity.
so okay, so when you bump up against the Twitter bro with his cute thread, but somehow it lands with you like, "Oh yeah, I could," because you said you sometimes go down these rabbit holes. I used to go down them for like weeks. I'm now getting much better. Now it's like
Oh, good.
15 minutes. I just know to
Nice.
go outside and throw something heavy around or go spend some time in the mountains and everything gets clear. What do you
Pre-
do to remind yourself of like, yeah, I don't need to go do because I know
yeah.
half the people I talk to uh, are spending most of their time off in distraction.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you do to stay clear when it comes up?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, my whole career, and especially the recent years that I've spent developing a framework for building a life, like serves as a robust reminder to me. So like I've
Mm,
had this series that I've been experimenting with on my Substack called Fantastic Builders and Where to Find Them, where
super
I
good.
just profile, and what I'm trying to do in part is to provide kind of counter examples to really counteract some of the overnight success stories that you're talking about, the success porn, where we just kind of see this like shiny object at the end of whatever the
Mhm.
painful, circuitous journey might have been. Instead, I kind of zoom in on a part of someone's journey. So like most recently, I profiled Sahil Lavinia, who
Mhm.
failed famously, to build a billion dollar, company, and then like went to Utah, hung out with Mormons and creative like fantasy writers, and notice how they're all beholden to their templates of success, which are nothing like the ones he's internalized, but like equally arbitrary. And then at some point
Right.
was like, but what do I want out of my life? I'm a creator. I like to paint as much as I love to code. I don't want the life of Bill Gates. Like, I love Bill Gates. I admire him. I admire what he's built, but that's not me. Like, I don't
Yeah.
want to single-mindedly be obsessing over the code and then the team that I have to manage, and this like billion-dollar enterprise. I want a really balanced life, and this creator economy thing is coming, online, and that's what's going to actually serve my needs, and that's success for me, is like this really
Mm.
lean company where I don't have to keep growing the team. I just provide sustainable value to creators like myself, and then we all get to go create more and better,
Mm.
unburdened by a lot of this
Mm.
the administrative
Mm.
stuff. So I remind me, it's like I go back and I look at that. I'm like, think of Sahil.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this is not the only way to live. This is not everyone, like
Yeah.
what's my yardstick here? What do I want? What do I love? And also, I've done values
Huh.
clarification exercises. I have a one-line mission statement that I sometimes return to if I really need
Huh.
like a quick boost of clarity of like,
Yeah.
my mission in life is to inspire and empower ambitious self-creation through conversations both on scales both. See, I can't remember my mission statement. That's a problem.
Fine.
On scales both intimate and grand. And like the intimate is in bold, because what I love is this kind of like one-on-one
Yeah.
conversation. Like I love going deep much more than I love going broad. And
Yeah.
so even when I write, like it might be on a grand scale if it's published and becomes a bestseller, but like I'm writing
Right.
to one reader at a time. Like I'm
That's
delving
so
deep.
great. Yeah, I've called that a statement of financial purpose. And
Mm,
I have sort of this dream that there will be a day where that's like ubiquitous, right? Like because mine is time with my family mainly outside. And I first wrote that in an act of like total frustration on this chalkboard I had.
nice.
Because I had just spent like 4 hours digging into the next private investment somebody had offered. And I was like, wait, why am I doing this? And I wrote that. I was like, does this help me get outside more? No, it doesn't. Never mind. And that
Yep.
was
Awesome.
that's really been helpful. Well, Gina, let me
That's
just
awesome.
ask you a couple final questions, sort of rapid fire that we can close on. Yeah, there's so much I want to, super fun conversation.
Same. This has been delightful and therapeutic, which I can't often say for my podcast interviews. So thank you.
It's really fun. Yeah, well, thank you. Tell me
Great
this, Gina,
project, by the way.
thank you. Personally, how do you think about enough?
Whenever I hear enough, I immediately want to activate a context of for what and for
Mm,
whom.
mm,
Because if it's just dangling by itself in my head
mm,
or in a client's head, because often clients will talk about like, but it's not enough and it wouldn't be enough. Immediately, my question, whether to them or to me, is for what? For
mm,
whom?
mm.
Toward what end? Because it's
For
just a
you.
relative measure, right?
Yeah.
It's a measure that's inherently relational, but that there's some implicit or explicit yardstick. So
Right.
can we at least just make it explicit? Like enough for your parents, enough for Twitter, enough to impress the VCs,
Right.
enough to afford your dream house? Okay, now we're talking. Maybe that's an
Yeah.
important, like genuinely meaningful goal that you actually want to be, enough to be able to fundraise again so that then you are positioned to grow the, company of your dreams. Okay, sure, we can talk about that. Maybe it's not enough in that context. Maybe you need to hustle and find, ways to
Right.
get more revenue, whatever. But like, for what
Okay.
and for
So,
whom?
Gina, how do you personally think about enough for you and your family?
Sure. No, good. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I answered that in a really therapeutic-y way rather than
It's
a
so
more
interesting to me
introspective
because
way. So
we
I'm
have
so
like
glad.
really smart, intelligent, successful people on. And sometimes my biggest challenge is to get them to go for them, like
Inward.
for you. Yeah.
That's all. I mean, thank you for asking again, because yeah, it's
Can
clearly
I?
not my default MO.
Yeah.
And I
While you
really
think about
appreciate you
it,
asking.
let me
For
tell you a funny
me,
story. Let me tell you a
yeah,
quick funny
sure.
story while you think about it. I had this chance to go on a walk with the Irish poet David White in the Tetons. It's a long story, but he's my favorite poet. When I said that once, my daughter was like, "How many other poets are on the list?" I was like, "One." So it's not like I have a big range of, but he wrote this amazing poem called "Start Close In," and then another one called "Sometimes." And in "Sometimes," he says something like, "If you work really hard, you can get to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests." Like questions that have no right to go away, questions that have been patiently waiting for you. So I asked him, I
Ooh,
said, "Hey, David, at this point in your career, what are the tiny but frightening requests?" And he was like, "Don't
wow.
do that to me. Like, you're not allowed to use my own." So anyway, I'm
Love it. No, you are
doing it to
allowed. And
you.
I do it to
For
me,
you.
please.
Yeah, for you. How do you think about enough?
When my better angels are at the helm, and that's, more and more of the time, but certainly not all the time, it's already enough in a fundamental sense that I have an insanely awesome life. Like everything I dreamed of as a kid, that I would have someone actually who loves me and I love him, or, at the time probably him, that has ended up being, by choice, that I would be getting to talk to really smart, impressive people, that I would have a family that I enjoyed being part of, that I had built, that I would have cool friends. It's all happened beyond my wildest dreams. Like, I
Mm,
am married to the person that I actually consider maybe the smartest, but definitely like the best, like the most good person, maybe in the world, but certainly of everyone I've met. And I get to just live with him and build a life with him and learn from him every day.
yeah.
And we have these incredible kids who delight us every day, and we get to nurture their growth, and we get to think about how to really I'm married to a Montessorian who is a philosopher of education who knows more than anybody on the planet about Montessori. And then we get to compare notes on,
Wow.
okay, what have I learned from psychology, and what have you learned, from your study of education? And then we get to like experiment on our own children,
Right.
and really
Right.
coming to understand and practice those norms. And there's nothing I want for fundamentally. Like my life is full. Like when I talk
Mm,
about living a full life, this is
mm,
it. I have that. And I can very distinctly remember when I didn't. And I know the difference. Like it's
hmm,
qualitatively different.
hmm, hmm,
So that's the answer that I can genuinely give when my better angels are at the helm.
hmm.
Sometimes my better angels are not at the helm. Sometimes, my mind gets hijacked by my own habitual scarcity mindsets and drill sergeants, as I call them, that are like, well, but you could be making so much more. And every client you talk to is like worried about, the tens of billions or tens of millions. And like, you're over here still worried about what, like you're not even post scarcity. And
Mm,
so all the kinds of things that lure me into kind of down those rabbit holes we talked about, for
mm,
sure. And, but like the way I know that fundamentally I've arrived is that I've got my husband, I've got really close, kind of intimate friends who like I used to admire from afar and be intimidated by, who now are just best friends, to tell me like, who cares? To
mm,
ask me those questions immediately of, what are you like, for what and for whom? Like, why? Why do
mhm,
you need this? How would this improve your life? And
mhm,
and they help kind of bring me back to full sanity.
mm. That's really great. Yeah, I love that. You're relatively public about having kids.
Indeed.
How old is your youngest?
He's almost 2. He's 1 and 11 months.
Of course. Let's just pretend like 30 years from now I'm still doing the show and you're now
As I can only hope.
32-year-old son is on the show.
Whoa.
What would you and I ask him what money means to him.
Wow. What an
What would
amazing thought
you
experiment this is.
what would you hope he would say?
An affordance for impact and agency. I think like I would hope maybe he wouldn't use such highfalutin term, but like, I would hope that he says like, I mean,
Tool.
it's a really nice tool to have. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a nice tool and I factor it in among a lot of other factors when I think about what I want to do next, or, any given decision about my life.
Yeah. How healthy would that be?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can only hope.
Yeah. Well, me too. Gena, what a lovely conversation. Thanks for taking the time to talk about this today.
It was my great pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Carl, and thank you for what you're building and for this show and for the free therapy.
Exactly.
Truly
Likewise.
appreciate
Cheer.
Cheers.
50 Fires is a production of Blind Nil Audio in association with The Roost. I'm looking forward to our next conversation around the fire. Cheers, my friends.
The views, information, or opinions expressed in this series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Chip and Joanna Gaines, Blind Nil Audio, nor Magnolia.